My name is Jessica Cherry,
My name is Alyssa Sheehan.
and this is our lesson plan for computational thinking. We decided to go with an ELA standard of second grade, and we titled our lesson Word Investigator. This would just be like a 1 day lesson, and students will be able to learn new words by predicting what they mean and decomposing the word into smaller pieces.
Some of our learning objectives are the student will be able to identify the meaning of words by using context clues within the text. Students will be able to quickly assess, separate parts of a word by decomposing the term. Students will be able to create their own definitions of terms. Students will be able to correct academic vocabulary, such as breakdown, pattern, root words, and prefixes, and students will be able to use new words and predict their meanings.
Our standard is 2FLVA7A, which is determine or clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meanings of words and phrases based on grade 2 reading and content, choosing flexibility from an array of strategies. 1, using sentence level context as clues to the meaning of a word or phrase. 2, determine the meaning of a new word formed when a known affix is added to a known word. Use a known root word as a clue to the meaning of an unknown word with the same root. Use knowledge of the meaning of an individual word to predict the meaning of compound words, and use glossaries and beginning dictionaries, both print and digital, to determine or clarify the meaning of words and phrases.
Okay, and as second grade students, they should know the following academic language: prefix or prefixes, which is a word, letter, or number placed before another; root words, which is a word that could be made into a new word by adding a prefix or suffix; pattern, which is the regular and repeated way in which something happens or is done; and breakdown, which is to decompose or break apart, as in words.
For our academic language, during the decomposition of a word, students will identify each part of the word. The different parts of the words are prefix and root. By identifying the parts of words, students can predict definitions because of the meaning of their prefixes. It is the step-by-step process of this lesson that relates to computational thinking. Computational thinking involves the step-by-step process of thinking and knowing how you got from one place to another and to be able to remember it later. This is an important part of developing words in English, especially when they're first learning how to add prefixes to words to create a new meaning.
Okay, a rationale for using computational thinking concepts to teach identified standards is when students are using the standard 2FLVA7A, they have to identify the unknown. By using computational thinking, students have to brainstorm the definition of the unknown word by the tools of prefixes and root words that are given to them.
For our lesson, to help us determine their prior knowledge, the teacher will ask things like, what is a prefix, what is a root word, and what is a definition. This helps educators to see their students already understand about the topic of words. Computational thinking definitions can be touched on with the class and vaguely explained. The students will talk through their own knowledge and assess where they're at. For this part, it's important to see what your students know and where your starting point is.
And so for the hook of our lesson, which is how we will catch the attention of our students, we'll explain that we'll be searching through words, acting as an investigator to determine the meaning of words. Teachers will set the stage by searching for vocabulary words, and they can offer a group cutting and gluing activity of words by gluing the prefix to the root words to make it a full word. And then students will be rewarded for finishing first and correctly with a badge of honor.
So the real world connection is understanding that prefixes can change a whole word is very important. Students can learn how to incorporate these prefixes into their language and further their vocabulary skills. This helps students use context clues for words they do not know and how to determine the meaning of unknown words.
So for student reflections, teachers can ask the class to have a discussion and ask if there are any remaining questions by just kind of reflecting on the prefix for a root word. Students will have time of reflection at the end of class to show what they've learned.
So assessment, teachers can assess the learning through the lesson by thumbs up or thumbs down. So they could ask if they understand, and the student could just show it in front of their chest so the whole class doesn't have to know. You could do popsicle stick answering. So the teacher could ask questions and randomly call on students by drawing their name. And they can also assess it by monitoring the classroom throughout the lesson. Teachers can provide a matching worksheet to match the prefix to the root word and then the new word to a definition. There can be a word bank of prefixes on the left and the root words on the right. There can also be more than one prefix used for the same word. The bottom part will also contain a space for the students to write short definitions for each word, and this will create room for imagination and see cognition of the lesson, and it will help show the students' understanding of the lesson.
So, how teachers will monitor and give feedback during the lesson. We'll see how the students respond to the matching worksheet, and they will be observed while completing the activity. This leaves room for personal questions and clarification. Teacher will grade the worksheet based on a rubric and give individual feedback to help the students and the educator gauge where their learning is at. This will also help the teacher be able to determine if the class should review or move forward with learning.
So the evidence that we will be collecting throughout this is you'll have like the lesson that we're doing with the worksheets, which will give room for short answers and a presentation of their definitions that they did. There's also multiple choice, like with the matching part of it. And this will let the students have their own creativity, and it'll also help the teacher assess their knowledge.
Yeah, so for mastery, we'll grade their worksheets on a scale of 1 to 5, and the master will be 80% correctness. So 5 will be like the most correct, 100%, and then 1 will be the least correct.
So during our assessment, it requires the student to be organized with their thoughts, to interpret the meaning of things, to analyze the different prefixes and root words, and it also helps them to write. So this connects back to computational thinking because you're having a starting point and you're going to have to think through each step how to form these words and form the definitions, which is a really big part that we use in English every day, or when you're trying to see words that you don't really understand. This just helps give that basis for students to start learning how to integrate that into their everyday lives.
So, academic feedback. So, based on the data we collect in the assessment, students will turn in their assignment at the end of class, and teachers will grade accordingly. These worksheets will be returned, and a class discussion will be held to refresh the ones that over 45% of students miss. So, whichever questions I had the most struggle in. And then once the lesson is over, teachers will give students individual feedback to help their learning and ensure that they're getting the concept that's being taught in the lesson. Depending on the rate of mastery as a teacher, we may have to revisit the topic and reteach some aspects. We want to make sure that the majority are reaching mastery before moving forward in the lesson.
So for the actual part of the lesson, we will start by asking the students questions to test their prior knowledge and kind of like a basic starting point by asking questions about the prefixes and root words. We'll tie this into computational thinking and how to decompose words and think through them. We'll show examples on the board of prefixes and root words and how they connect together. And then we'll go over vocabularies that are given, vocabulary words that we will be giving them on a worksheet. And then we'll give about 10 minutes to discuss before we start the lesson.
So, in order to create like deeper level thinking within the students, some questions teachers may ask is, how do we know when a prefix ends and a root word begins? How do we make adequate definitions? And how does computational thinking tie in with predicting words?
The materials that the students will need is paper, pencil, the worksheet that will give them, scissors, and glue.
So, transitioning from the lesson, we will start by starting to guess what root words mean and prefixes mean. So, that could be like putting some up on the board and being like, oh, what do you think this definition is? What do you think this definition is? And just kind of seeing where the students are at.
So during the actual lesson, we're going to give them the worksheet to cut and glue prefixes to root words, and we'll help them throughout the lesson, but it's going to be more student driven and discussion than it is the student or the teacher standing in front of the class just lecturing. They will also be given a vocabulary worksheet to find their own definitions of words after reading the book, of Bad Case of Stripes book, and investigating words. And this ties into our activity. We kind of have two smaller activities that fit together. So we'll break them into groups to complete the worksheet that they have. And whichever group completes the worksheet correctly first will win a piece of candy and points for the classroom system. After a winner is decided, the group will present their correct words to the class, and this will also leave time for that discussion at the end of class. And then another activity is the students will be listening to the reading of the book, A Bad Case of Stripes, after we go through the vocabulary worksheet together, and then the students will choose their own vocabulary words to define and draw a picture representation of, and that'll take about 30 to 45 minutes.
So closing lessons, teachers will give another worksheet, which is a matching activity. Students will match the prefix from the word bank to the root word. And after they find the word, they will be asked to write short definitions for the words that they created, which will take about 15 minutes. And we'll just kind of see like how the lesson went, how solidified their understanding is, and this will help in days to come and see where the students are at.
So we'll be using different things such as graphics, smart boards, word processing, and then we'll be using those throughout the class, and our technology is showing the video, and then we'll be working through it with them.
Yeah. Can you scroll up a little bit? Thank you. So some teacher strategies we'll use is student choice, modeling, cooperative learning, independent learning, implementing pre, post, and during lesson activities, hands-on learning, manipulatives, and higher ordering thinking skills. Student choice and independent learning kind of go hand in hand for this assignment. Some other ones we'll use are evidence of assessment for learning, which is when teachers' instructions modifies based on student understanding and academic language using context. So by using all these things, it kind of incorporates lecture and student understanding as well as group work.
The rationale for technology integration is the most tangible one to use for second grade students, and it's very simple. You don't really want to overwhelm them with technology too young, and you want to keep it kind of simple and less distractions.
Okay, for grouping options, students will actually have three different ones. There'll be individual assessments, cooperative assessments, and whole group. So it'll kind of give them, some time for themselves, time in smaller groups, and then time for us as a class to reflect.
Differentiation is groups will be decided before class in order to create different opportunities for every group to succeed. Class discussion will always be available with a raised hand, and teachers should observe each student while watching the activity. And it's to make sure that we have the class grouping with higher like level students, with lower level students, with your students who are in your classes that need more help, they're paired with a higher thinking student. So that way it's an even group we choose before they come in, and it's equal opportunity for everyone.
Right. So for our rationale, going back to that, we believe that all students will benefit from these methods because it makes computational thinking fun and easy to understand. We believe that each student is capable of learning to the highest standard and are able to achieve academic success. We chose the strategies we did to help ensure that each student can learn. And it is hard to effectively teach at all times due to all students learning in unique ways, but it is important to maintain a positive and welcoming environment for all learners. When learning to read and the concept of new vocabulary words, it can become very frustrating for some learners. And as educators, it is important to not single out students and make sure they're all engaged in the lesson.
And that is our lesson plan.
Yay.
Okay.